Hey there, welcome to a new series here on The Scent. I'm False Proof, and this is Alternate Timelines, a show exploring how some of our favorite series could change completely with the smallest of tweaks. Since we've gained some notoriety for our Persona 4 Abridged series, I figured we could talk about another series that uses murder as a central plot device. Death Note. First published in Weekly Shonen Jump in 2004, the drama manga from writer Sugumi Oba and artist Takeshi Obata has spanned 12 volumes, 2 novels, an anime adaptation, a musical, and multiple films, including everyone's favorite Netflix release of 2017. Yeah, let's not go there. The plot revolves around high schooler Light Yagami, a brilliant Japanese student, and the Death Note, a notebook created by death gods or Shinigami in order to keep the cycle of life and death flowing naturally. After finding the Death Note and learning of its power, Light assumes the guise of Kira and begins his mission of creating a human utopia by eliminating the evil in the world. Obviously, a human having the Death Note is going to create all sorts of trouble, especially with someone as conceited as Light Yagami. It gets pretty crazy. These theories do contain spoilers for Death Note, so if you haven't read the manga or watched the anime, I'd go do that first and then come back and watch this video. If you have your own theories about Death Note, make sure to leave a comment after the video. To start things off, we're going to talk about something pretty crazy. What if Light never found the Death Note? In the canon timeline, the Shinigami Ryuk drops his Death Note into the human world, where it's found by Light. Eventually, Ryuk goes searching for his Death Note and meets Light, which kicks off all the events of Death Note. In our alternate timeline, Ryuk still drops his Death Note into the world and tries to go find it after waiting for like 5 days. Based on when Light finds it, the notebook doesn't take long to drop through the portal between the human world and the Shinigami realm. It seems to be based more on random probability that it landed in the courtyard of Light's high school. Compared to Light though, most people aren't going to have as strong of attraction to the power of the Death Note, and they may just abandon the notebook after writing a name or two down. And if we wanted a story with as much intrigue as the main timeline, I'd say it would have to be someone that's similar to Light in value and ideology, but not 100% the same. Rather than creating an original character, I'd rather use pre-existing characters in the universe. The two best possible candidates are Kiyomi Takeda and Teru Mikami, who are used in the main timeline to further Light's plan of a new world. Takeda is more representative of the cold, calculated nature of Light, the part of him that manages to outwit the various police forces and detectives coming after Kira. Mikami is a lot more brash. He's willing to do whatever it takes to further Kira's goals. Takeda and Mikami would most likely kill people similarly to Light. When they start using the Death Note, Takeda would most likely experiment with it at first, and then sort of cool off for a bit. Whereas Mikami may just do what he did in the canon timeline and kill everyone. Takeda probably wouldn't have as big of a head about it as Light did, and since he thinks the Death Note is a gift from God, Mikami would probably just worship the fuck out of Ryuk. Takeda is going to be a lot more careful than Mikami. That's because Mikami wants retribution in relation to his own suffering, which would probably cause him to act a little more erratic. There is a bit of a trade-off though, as Mikami would most likely do the trade for the Shinigami eyes, which could prove to be beneficial or detrimental depending on what happens. Following along this path, the first confrontation with L still happens, and depending on the reactions of Mikami or Takeda, it could turn out differently. I would say that Mikami would take the bait as Light did, whereas Takeda would stop killing or wait things out. You also don't have the problem of Light being a suspect after going through his dad's files to kill off police agents. Because of this, a database breach would be less likely, and Light wouldn't be as large of a suspect in this scenario. At some point, Light would probably join the task force to help Elle and his dad find Kira. The FBI arc with Ray Penber and Naomi Misura might not happen as early as it does in the canon timeline. Once Light joins the task force, he would be at Toho University, where he would meet Takeda and begin dating her. This may be how the task force begins pinpointing if Takeda is Kira or not. I'd also assume that Elle is still following Light around at university under the guise of Ryuzaki. Maybe not because he views Light as Kira, but more as a security precaution, because the other detectives are under surveillance at this point, and they also have less ideological similarities to Kira. During this time, Rem would still drop her notebook for Misa to find, as it happens in the main timeline. The burglar who killed her parents gets killed off, and Misa finds out about Kira. You would then have Misa trying to track down Takeda or Mikami. In our scenarios, it could be similar to the canon timeline with Mikami in Light's place. Takeda would probably just brush her off, which might just set Misa off and cause her to spiral emotionally. Takeda may also bring in Misa as her new best friend to use her as a bit of a cover. Invariably, without her love for Light being a factor in controlling her emotional well-being and use of the Death Note, Misa having the Shinigami eyes might wind up inadvertently killing someone important to the task force. If you remember the college campus scene from the main timeline, we'd see something similar in the alternate timeline. Light and Takeda are walking on campus when they meet up with Ryuzaki. At this point, Takeda would know a lot of the Death Note rules. She may have also found out about the rule that allows a time of death to be chosen as far ahead as 23 days. Takeda may have told Misa about this information. Misa then gets jealous of Takeda and Light, writes Light's name in the Death Note, and Light dies. The task force begins investigating and uncovers Misa as the second Kira, which would then lead to Takeda being found out. A better scenario for Takeda and Misa would be Misa showing up on campus all jealous only to find Ryuzaki fawning over her. Wanting to keep his friend happy, Light suggests a double date. Takeda and Light, and Ryuzaki and Misa. After the double date, Misa gets fed up and writes Ryuzaki's real name in the Death Note. L is Ryuzaki, so L dies. Misa gets detained under suspicion of being the second Kira, and then the storyline moves to Light and Takeda dating and trying to defeat the other in a battle of wits. As for Mikami, his storyline would be similar to the main timeline, although he might get caught sooner since you have Light and L both working together to find Kira. I'd probably say that Takeda would make the better Kira. Moving on to a bit of a shorter theory, what if Light killed Misa Amane? In the main timeline, Light gets stuck with Misa after she finds out he's actually Kira, and he tries to figure out a way to kill her since he knows her real name. However, her Shinigami Rem pretty much tells him, hey, if you kill Misa, I'm gonna kill you. After Rem dies in the main series, Misa is used mostly as a second Kira, using her Shinigami eyes to help kill more people for Kira. Light gets suspected of being Kira by L's successor Nier, so he lets Misa act as Kira to throw off the scent. In theory, Mikami could fill the same role as Misa, as he does later on in the canon timeline when she gives up the Death Note. At this point in our alternate timeline, the Kira phenomenon would sweep the world with many stations broadcasting their support. Mikami would be pinpointed again, as he is during the second arc, as an ideal second Kira. After all the confusing mess of ownership, Light gives up the Death Note to the task force, and his plan will then come into effect. 23 days earlier, he writes that Misa would die of a slow-acting disease in order to buy him some more time. Misa dies off, but not before sending the Death Note to Mikami. Mikami starts off as second Kira, Light takes time off to grieve his dead wife, and all of his personal ties have been tied up before he begins working with Takeda and Mikami. Alright, let's jump into the next theory. What if Mikami had kept real pages of the Death Note? As the climax of the story draws near, Light instructs Mikami to give Takeda notebook clippings. Mikami then hides the real notebook and creates an identical forgery to throw Nier, the SPK, and the Japanese task force off his trail. Mikami sends the real names to Takeda to write down on the notebook clippings to match his fake notebook. Once Takeda outlives her usefulness after being kidnapped by Mello, both Light and Mikami write her name on Death Note paper, and she burns to death, removing any evidence of her involvement. Light does so from his escort to the warehouse meeting, and Mikami writes in his notebook stored in a safety deposit box at the bank. However, this is when Mikami is trailed by Giovanni, a member of the SPK. Giovanni was able to sneak in and replace the Death Note with a perfect copy, throwing Light's ultimate plan into complete disarray. What doesn't make sense is why Light just didn't tell Mikami to keep clippings for himself in an emergency after giving the Death Note to Takeda. Obviously, Mikami's gonna listen and not do anything else, as he reveres Light, calling him God all the damn time. In this scenario, Light gets Mikami to show up to the warehouse meeting and do what he did in the regular timeline. However, he also gets Mikami to write down the same names on the clippings, but 10 seconds later. That way, the SPK and Nier would believe they won, but in reality would die 10 seconds after their realization. With this, Light has defeated all his enemies, and he rules the world with Mikami and Misa by his side. Or maybe not. You know how Light feels about loose ends. I thought I could do 3, but let's end things off with a bit of a bonus theory. Who will be the next user of the Death Note? In February 2020, Shonen Jump released a new one-shot manga chapter of Death Note from Oba and Obata. Set in the current day, the notebook falls into the hands of Minoru Tanaka, who has a bit of a different use for the Death Note. I would say that there's spoilers in this video for the one-shot, but to be honest, you could pretty much just read it in 20 minutes if you haven't already. I'll link it in the description. Go read it and then come back. Now that everybody's caught up, we know that Minoru sells the Death Note to the United States for $1 quadrillion American dollars. He distributes it evenly between the customers of Yotsuba Bank, giving each person 1 billion yen. That's a lot of money. The Shinigami King takes exception to this workaround and creates a new rule that causes the death of the seller and the buyer of the Death Note. Minoru then dies, but the president never actually physically accepts the Death Note for the USA, thereby staying alive. The one-shot ends with Ryuk wanting someone to hold onto the Death Note for a little bit longer than Light or Minoru. So who could that be? Well, the last few pages of the one-shot do give us some clues. Firstly, the Death Note remains in the USA according to Ryuk. Now, Ryuk could take it back whenever he wants, as we see him holding the Death Note above a Yotsuba bank sign. But having an American use the Death Note would be really cool and a nice change of pace. It'd be interesting to see the clash of ideologies in American society affect the use of the Death Note. During his meeting with the president, Ryuk also states that someone high and mighty will get the notebook, but the president himself would die. In the one-shot, the president doesn't buy or accept ownership and stays alive, but if we follow this trail, we might find a new Death Note owner. Let's say a member of the president's cabinet takes the Death Note, having enough security clearance to do so without any scrutiny. Since Ryuk says it'll remain in the USA, I'd assume the Death Note is heavily guarded within the White House. From there, it could go to almost anyone. I'd be more inclined to see it transfer from the cabinet minister to someone they know that's a bit younger who might not have political power. The intrigue of Death Note stems from young people using the notebook to tip the scales of power in their favor. Light makes the world kneel to him, and Minoru controls their capital by auctioning the notebook. Now, the White House wouldn't disclose the true nature of Kira's power, so no other countries would know how it works. So I could see it going to a younger American who discovers the true power of the Death Note and has just enough time to master it before the Death Note's disappearance is traced. The new owner would definitely be way more cautious. Minoru says that every form of communication is now under surveillance, and having learned of Light's downfall from general education and rumor, the new owner would pretty much just try experimentation first. They try and figure out all the rules to throw everybody off the trail by extending deaths, changing up how people would die, what they might do before their death, etc., etc. They'd leave less clues. It would be cool to see a new Kira that isn't satisfied with the current state of affairs in the USA and wants to make things right, depending on what they view as right. That could definitely bring up some interesting questions about morality and its relation to American society. Who knows how it could play out? That's just some of the ways the Death Note could have changed. Leave me a comment or two on how you think things could be changed. Death Note is definitely a series that really hooks you and pulls you into the conflict right away, but it is really dark. I need a break from all of that sometimes, and you might too. So why not watch something a little more lighthearted, like Persona 4 Golden Bridged? You'll forget all about the evils of the Death Note when you see Yu Narukami and his pals try to solve a murder mystery while hanging out and enjoying themselves, albeit with a few more crazy moments than usual. You can start watching now on our YouTube channel or on our website, thescent.net. Thanks for tuning in to The Scent, and come back soon.